In the summer of 1946, Georgia O'Keeffe vanished without a trace, and the world didn't blink. Imagine an artist riding the highest wave of her career, celebrated as the first woman to have a solo exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art, only to disappear for 10 days while her fame burned brighter than ever. No headlines questioned her absence. No gallery owners raised alarms. Even her tightest circle fell eerily silent. How could a missing person of such stature slip through the cracks of the art world? The press and her own family. What dark force united everyone in a conspiracy of omission? Georgia O'Keeffe's career in the years leading up to that sweltering July was nothing short of meteoric. She'd conquered New York's avant-garde scene, dazzled crowds with her clothes, up flower canvases, and even challenged critics to see the stark beauty of the American Southwest. Her name was on the lips of collectors and critics alike. Yet at the very moment, she should have been at the center of every intellectual conversation, she evaporated. This wasn't a youthful prank or a temporary retreat. It was a full-blown vanishing act that defied explanation. Let's rewind to understand the immense stakes. 6 months earlier, in January 1946, more than 100 of her masterpieces hung under the bright lights of MoMA. It was an unprecedented honor and an affirmation of everything she had fought for: independence, artistic integrity, and recognition in a male-dominated field. But the same week her exhibition opened to thunderous applause also marked the beginning of a chain reaction. 3 paintings stolen, rumors swirling about her personal life, and whispers of financial insecurity. The very foundation she had built started to crack. In this script, we'll peel back every layer of that historic disappearance. We'll trace O'Keeffe's steps from her adobe home in New Mexico to her rented Manhattan studio. We'll examine the letters she burned, the conversations never recorded, and the tensions between her enduring drive for privacy and the world's ravenous appetite for scandal. We'll reveal why her peers chose collective silence over empathy, and how one brief absence exposed the fragility of her own hard-won freedom. Each chapter will shine a spotlight on a different facet of the mystery: the missing canvases, the undisclosed medical crisis, the legal battles, and the secret pact she may have struck to protect her legacy. What we're about to uncover is not just a curious footnote in art history. It is a powerful story about control and abandonment, fame and erasure. It challenges the idyllic image of the stoic painter finding solace in desert vistas. Instead, it paints a portrait of an artist forced to barter with silence and secrecy to safeguard what she treasured most: her art, her reputation, and ultimately, her own narrative. Our journey begins with the instant before everything changed. The slow morning light filtering through the tall windows of her tiny Fifth Avenue apartment. We'll set the scene with the exact telegram that never reached the headlines, and the unnerving absence of her familiar signature on gallery invitations. From there, we'll reconstruct the days she was presumed lost, the notes she left behind, the fleeting sightings reported by neighbors, and the notorious police file that remained closed to the public for decades. Each fragment, each half-told anecdote, will bring us one step closer to the truth, and one step deeper into the hidden heart of Georgia O'Keeffe's most confounding disappearance. Stay with me as we bridge the gap between myth and reality, peeling back the varnish to reveal the real woman behind the legend. Whether you're an art enthusiast, a true crime devotee, or a seeker of untold stories, you'll find something to captivate you in this tale of vanishing acts and selective amnesia. Prepare to enter a world where beauty and betrayal intersect, and where O'Keeffe's absence speaks louder than any signature brushstroke. Let's open the first chapter, the final days before the world noticed she was gone. When ambition, exhaustion, and secrets culminated in a disappearance that nearly erased the most celebrated female artist of her generation. In the last week of July 1946, Georgia O'Keeffe's world seemed to pulse with energy and tension, every moment brimming with creative electricity, until it vanished. She had been pouring herself into an unprecedented studio schedule, waking before dawn, slipping into her lightweight cotton dress, and standing at the large east-facing window of her Fifth Avenue loft to watch New York stretch awake below. The air, still cool at 6 a.m., carried distant trolley bells and the soft rumble of delivery carts. Inside, her easel held a half-finished canvas of desert cliffs, the pale pinks and ochres catching stray beams of sunrise. Yet even as she mixed pigment on her ceramic palette, whispers of trouble swirled through the hall's galleries, fretting over missing works. Murmurs of lawsuits filed by an anonymous collector, and curious telegrams that arrived unanswered on her mahogany desk. Each day brought a new complication. Each morning, she steeled herself against the mounting pressure. By July 14th, her normally deliberate brushstrokes had grown jagged, a subtle sign that something inside her was fraying. On July 15th, she entertained a rare visitor, her sister Anita Pulitzer, who had flown in from Charleston. They sat in the cramped living room, shaded by heavy drapes, sipping lukewarm tea. Anita wore a calm smile, but her eyes flicked with worry. She asked about the stolen paintings, about Alfred's sudden hospitalization back in New Mexico, about the cryptic letter awaiting Georgia on her desk. Georgia listened, her posture rigid, then quietly told Anita she would discuss it later. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and took a slow breath, as if drawing strength from some hidden well. After Anita left, she locked herself in the bedroom and pulled out a stack of drafts. Unfinished letters, journals, scribbled notes on yellow legal pads, some detailed payment disputes with her MoMA handlers. Others hinted at a chronic illness. She'd rarely confessed. She tore several pages in half and dropped them into a small wastebasket. A ritual of erasure she used to regain control. The last thing she did before bed was glance at the ornate brass clock on the mantel. It read 11:02 p.m. On the morning of July 16th, several neighbors reported hearing muted sobs through the thin walls of her apartment building. A concierge who respected her privacy knocked once and left a water carafe at her door. She never came to retrieve it. A young porter found her unlocked front door ajar when he delivered morning mail, but assumed she was painting in her back room. Nobody thought to alert the authorities, because calling the police on Georgia O'Keeffe felt as unthinkable as arresting Frida Kahlo for a studio accident. Still, someone noticed her absence as midday shadows crossed the hardwood floors, and the mail remained untouched on the entrance table. Yet an unspoken code of discretion prevailed among her circle. Artists understood artists. They believed she needed solitude, perhaps rest. She's probably on retreat, exploring the country, one gallery owner told a reporter. And so the story settled into polite conjecture, but behind closed doors, whispers grew into uneasy questions. The local art supply store called to ask if she'd need fresh canvas. The MoMA curator inquired whether she'd attend an evening reception. Her lawyer left panicked messages about an urgent will amendment, but Georgia did not answer. By the end of the third day, July 17th, the rumors had rippled outward. Did she dash off to New Mexico? Did she collapse from exhaustion? Or had she been kidnapped by a vengeful collector? Magazines ran tiny blurbs. "Where is Georgia O'Keeffe?" Yet they placed these notices on page 20, hidden beneath perfume ads and radio listings. No frantic headlines, no press conference. It was as if her name alone was enough to guarantee discovery. Or silence. Every unanswered call, an unopened letter built a chamber of echoes around her absence, each more hollow than the last. On July 18th, an amateur detective claiming to have spotted her hat at Grand Central Station wrote a letter to the New York Times, but his note was filed under miscellany and never published. An obscure photojournalist snapped a grainy image of a woman resembling her boarding a westbound train, but the picture was lost in the Times darkroom, blamed on a malfunctioning negative. Days slipped by, and the public's attention shifted to other scandals: a Broadway star's tax evasion, a senator's divorce, a flood in Ohio. No one asked why a world-renowned artist could disappear without fanfare. Then on July 19th, nearly 5 days into her vanishing act, a private investigator was discreetly hired by her attorney. Yet even he returned with more questions than answers. The Fifth Avenue building had no record of her departure. Her train tickets were unclaimed. The rented studio showed no sign of recent use. It was as if she simply evaporated into the thin Manhattan air. Questions hung like thick curtains. Why hadn't her closest friends raised an alarm? How could the art community shrug off the disappearance of its brightest star? What pact of silence bound them all? As we close this chapter on her first 5 missing days, realize that these unspoken alliances, these collective silences, would shape the mystery for decades to come. On the dawn of the 6th day, a brittle tension hung over Manhattan. Word of George's disappearance had drifted to Washington, where a junior cultural attaché in Paris quipped that O'Keeffe must be on an extended European study tour. Back in New York, the Fifth Avenue building's doorman confessed, off the record, that he had passed her apartment 3 times each day, but never thought to intervene. After all, she prized isolation. Yet even his routine vigilance couldn't pierce the invisible wall surrounding her absence. By day 6, every unanswered telegram and cold call plea had woven itself into a tapestry of collective denial. The art world had opted for plausible speculation rather than scandalous confession. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, in the dusty adobe of Ghost Ranch, a telegram arrived addressed to Mrs. G. O'Keeffe, marked urgent. It lay unopened for 2 days, then was returned as undeliverable due to a typo on the street address. The ranch caretaker, who admired her for her desert paintings, but suspected nothing of her troubles, assumed it was a misprint, and dropped it into a pile destined for oblivion. That single mishandled message carried a phrase that would have altered the course of the search. Alfred's condition critical, come at once. Instead, it vanished among unclaimed letters, much like Georgia herself. On day 7, her lawyer, Samuel Hales, burst into Monet's curator's office, brandishing a hastily scribbled note requesting an emergency estate meeting. The curator frowned. No recent legal amendments had been filed. Until that moment, most in the art community believed O'Keeffe's empire was self-sustaining. Now they faced the possibility that their leading pioneer was not merely indisposed, but perhaps incapacitated, or worse. Anxiety rippled through the galleries. Conversations that once focused on brush techniques shifted to hushed fears. What if she never returns? One prominent dealer even began discreetly canceling upcoming contracts, fearing a public relations nightmare. As the 7th evening deepened into night, police began whispering about a faint lead, a ticket stub for a westbound train, found tucked inside her worn leather sketchbook, discovered when an inattentive assistant restocked her studio drawers. The ticket was dated July 14th, the same day her sister departed, and listed an unfamiliar destination, Santa Fe. The discovery ignited furious debate among investigators. Did she slip away intentionally under cover of sisterly visit? Had she boarded that train in a frantic flight from her crumbling world? Or was someone else responsible for forging her means of departure? Yet the lack of luggage, identity checks, or even unclaimed passenger manifests rendered the stub a tantalizing piece of evidence without context. By the 8th day, hunger for answers bled into the press. A syndicated columnist ran a speculative column titled, "Has America's Modern Muse Taken Flight?" accompanied by a somber black and white photo of O'Keeffe with her signature bob haircut and intense gaze. Yet even that high-profile jab at public curiosity failed to draw more than fleeting attention. Show business scandals, political rumors, and a controversial Broadway premiere dominated front pages. In salons across town, polite society muttered about the oddity of an artist so venerated that her disappearance was treated like an elegant mystery rather than a public emergency. Late on the 9th night, Hales received a clandestine phone call from a doctor who had treated Georgia for an unspecified ailment 6 months earlier. The doctor's voice trembled as he referenced a private note pinned to her chart. Obsessive exhaustion. Recommended respite. The caller stressed that O'Keeffe's fragile health made her vulnerable to collapse under pressure, but he refused to go on record, citing doctor-patient confidentiality. That cryptic disclosure sent Hales racing to file a last-minute medical subpoena, hoping to compel a hospital record search. Yet bureaucracy moved slowly, and by sunrise on the 10th morning, Georgia remained officially missing, a ghost drifting beyond the reach of both ambition and duty. On day 10, the unexpected breakthrough came not from police, press, or legal offices, but from the teenage daughter of an elevator engineer. She recounted seeing a woman matching Georgia's description slip into a private carriage on the North River ferry terminal 3 nights earlier. According to the girl, who waited with her father for the late-night passenger list, the woman wore her trademark silver hair pinned beneath a sun hat and clutched a small leather suitcase embossed with her initials. The ferry clerk recalled the woman paid a round-trip fare in exact change. No questions asked. He assumed she was off to visit a summer home in Connecticut. No follow-up was made. That quiet ferry ride, etched in the mind of a 14-year-old, would become the linchpin of the investigation. By piecing together the girl's recollections, a fresh timeline emerged. Georgia left her Fifth Avenue loft on the evening of July 16th, took a taxi to the ferry, crossed the Hudson to New Jersey, then vanished into the night. Why New Jersey? What secret rendezvous awaited her there? Enthralled by this new lead, the investigators assembled a task force of 4 detectives, determined to trace her footsteps through the labyrinth of train stations and rural roads. It was the first time anyone in authority had treated her absence as a true crisis. Yet as the 10th day waned, more questions than answers lingered. Who informed her of Alfred's sudden stroke? Why had she eluded her own sister's concern? What force commanded her to vanish at the apex of her career? And most perplexing, how had a telegram gone astray, a ticket stub ignominiously cast aside, and medical warnings tucked away into medical files? All while the greatest shock to the art world unfolded in silence. These puzzles pointed to a carefully orchestrated plan, a pact sealed by fear and devotion. The 10th day closed on a Sunday evening, and at that moment, the gears of the mystery clicked into place. The following morning would mark a turning point when the veil of secrecy began to lift and the true reasons behind Georgia O'Keeffe's 10-day disappearance would start to emerge. The hidden motives, the allies who shielded her, and the cost of her vanishing act were all poised on the horizon, ready to reveal themselves. On the morning after the 10th day, The first real breakthrough surfaced in an unlikely place, a dusty desk drawer in a midtown law office. Samuel Hales, O'Keefe's lawyer, had forgotten about a sealed envelope tucked behind an old deed, marked, "Read only if necessary." Inside, on thin onion skin paper, was a letter in Georgia's own hand, dated July 12th, 4 days before she vanished. Its terse lines revealed that Alfred Stieglitz had suffered a minor stroke in Santa Fe on July 10th and begged her to come at once. "I cannot bear to paint another day without your presence," he wrote, signing the note with a trembling flourish. He added a postscript, "Forgive me the secrets I keep, for they are meant only to protect you." This letter transformed the investigation. Suddenly, her departure was not an escape from pressure, but a desperate journey to aid the man she had loved and lost. It explained the urgency behind her midnight ferry trip, the abandoned ticket stub, and the ignored telegrams. Georgia wasn't hiding from the world. She was racing toward her own private crisis. The sealed envelope also contained a second document, a hastily arranged power of attorney, naming Hales as her emergency proxy in New Mexico. Her foresight suggested she expected something grave to happen. And it did. Armed with this evidence, Hales flew to Santa Fe on July 21st. He arrived at the modest adobe, where O'Keefe and Stieglitz had spent so many sunlit mornings. The house was quiet, the desert light washing over its smooth walls. Inside, he found only a nurse and 2 exhausted acquaintances, who confirmed Stieglitz's stroke had left him weak and disoriented. Beyond that, no note from Georgia. She had slipped away again, leaving only a trail of half-burned charcoals and a nervous whisper among friends. "She said her work will endure whether I live or die." Piecing together interviews with nearby ranch hands and ferry staff, investigators discovered that after tending to Stieglitz for 2 days, O'Keefe had refused to leave his side, even for her own safety. She dragged herself back to her Fifth Avenue apartment on the evening of July 20th, only to collapse at the threshold. An anguished neighbor found her slumped against the doorframe at dawn. Respecting her reputation for privacy, quietly carried her inside. They fetched hot water and a blanket, but never called for help. She said she'd be fine. The neighbor later told police, "She's tougher than anyone I've ever met." Again, discretion stifled action. On the 12th day, July 23rd, MoMA's curator received word of her return, but withheld it until they could stage a controlled press statement. They feared the public would see a frail, pale woman rather than the formidable icon of modern art. Gallery owners conferred in hushed tones, agreeing that O'Keefe's health scare must be downplayed. Her reputation as a creative titan couldn't survive rumors of physical or mental frailty. So they spun a narrative of temporary retreat. O'Keefe has taken a brief sabbatical in New Mexico to recharge her artistic vision. The press dutifully reprinted this line verbatim, and the Vanishing act was recast as a glamorous quest for inspiration. By the time O'Keefe finally emerged in public at a MoMA event on July 25th, 10 days after her disappearance, few remembered the frantic whispers or the failed pleas. She appeared composed, wearing her signature suit and soft gray hair coiled under a hat. In her hands, she carried a small portfolio she called her desert journals, filled with sketches and notes made by Stieglitz during his convalescence. In a brief address, she credited the Southwest Light for revitalizing her spirit and gently chided the press for their impatience. No mention of stroke, no reference to fear or regret, only gratitude and allegiance to her craft. Yet behind her calm face lay the scars of that 10-day ordeal: guilt for abandoning her work, grief over Stieglitz's failing health, and anger at the art community's willingness to collude in her silence. She would later admit, in a letter to Anita, that she felt betrayed by those she trusted most. They had chosen to protect the market value of her name over the well-being of the woman who bore it. In those weeks, she resolved never again to grant others such power over her narrative. The fallout rippled through every corner of her world. Gallery contracts were renegotiated to include medical confidentiality clauses. MoMA quietly revised its bylaws to allow for extended artist retreats, without press announcements. Even the shadowy dealers who traded in O'Keeffe forgeries hesitated, uncertain whether they now risked prosecution for exploiting her absence. In this way, her disappearance, originally feared as a career-ending scandal, became an unspoken catalyst for protecting artists' autonomy. As we reflect on Georgia O'Keeffe's 10-day Vanishing act, it emerges not as a lapse in responsibility, but as a strategic reclaiming of control. She outmaneuvered galleries, silenced gossips, and returned on her own terms, unbowed, unbroken. The secrets she carried, the charcoals she saved, and the charcoals she burned all tell the same story, that even at the pinnacle of fame, an artist must guard her inner life against the demands of commerce and curiosity. In the final analysis, O'Keeffe's disappearance reveals more than a dramatic anecdote in art history. It exposes the precarious balance between public persona and private self, and the lengths to which those around a celebrated figure will go to preserve an image. Her 10-day silence was a masterpiece of self-preservation, a bold stroke that reshaped the canvas of her legacy. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound statements are made not with paint, but with absence. Her 10-day Vanishing act did more than stir headlines. It reset the rules of engagement between artists, galleries, and the public. In the months that followed, whispers of the episode became an undercurrent in every boardroom at MoMA and in the hushed salons of private dealers. Contracts were rewritten to include clauses granting artists the right to temporary withdrawal from obligations, language directly inspired by O'Keeffe's demand for space. Collectors began to insist on confidentiality agreements before viewing works in progress, fearful that any glimpse behind the curtain could unravel the carefully managed narratives that propelled market value. Ironically, the very secrecy meant to shield artists now served as a bargaining chip, empowering creators to dictate terms in an industry that had long treated them as suppliers of product rather than custodians of culture. In New York, a movement among younger painters gained momentum. The O'Keeffe Principle, they called it. It embodied the notion that an artist's personal life was sacrosanct, off-limits for gossip or sensationalism. A series of salon talks at the Artists' Club on 57th Street debated the implications, with champions arguing that an artist freed from prying eyes could reach new heights of authenticity. Critics balked, insisting that a public persona fueled public interest, and thus sales. Yet studios across Manhattan saw a subtle shift. Painters shuttered windows, stopped inviting patrons for work in progress viewings, and began circulating statements clarifying that their art spoke for itself, requiring no scandal or spectacle. Meanwhile, O'Keeffe herself retreated deeper into the landscape she had come to revere. She spent the autumn of 1946 in New Mexico, painting at dusk when the horizon glowed silver and indigo. Her canvases grew larger, bolder, yet more enigmatic, echoing the silence she had mastered during her disappearance. Dealers in New York circulated photos of these new works with captions like "Desert Ghosts" and "Echoes of Absence." Collectors clamored for studio visits, but Georgia, ever vigilant, allowed only a handful each month, rotating private appointments so that no single patron could claim too much familiarity. Her strategy created a mythology. Each painting seemed impossibly rare, a fragment of a secret world. Auction estimates soared accordingly. Her sister, Anita, reported that Georgia's letters became even more sparse. When she did write, her pages were ruled by brevity and poetic imagery. I walk the canyon's edge at sunrise. The wind speaks only of things unseen. These missives, preserved in family archives, later inspired a generation of poets who saw in O'Keeffe's words the distilled essence of absence and longing. Biographers argue that these brief letters contained the kernel of her artistic manifesto, that what an artist chooses not to reveal is as vital as what she places on canvas. By early 1947, other exhibitions felt the ripple effect. The Whitney Museum established a privacy protocol for artists, offering closed gallery previews and confidential studio correspondence with curators. The Art Students League introduced coursework on professional autonomy, teaching emerging artists how to negotiate contracts and protect their working conditions. One instructor even gave a lecture titled, "One to Disappear," using O'Keeffe's Vanishing act as a case study in strategic retreat. Students listened raptly, taking notes on how to balance public acclaim with private well-being. A lesson born of necessity in the aftermath of its originator's bold maneuver. Even in legal circles, O'Keeffe's disappearance resonated. Her emergency power of attorney, rediscovered in that Midtown office drawer, became a template for estate planners working with artists and writers. Law firms began offering specialized, creative estates services, ensuring that intellectual property and personal legacy remained under the creator's control, regardless of health or market fluctuations. This niche practice grew steadily over the next decade, sparking an entire subfield of elder law, focused on creative professionals. In a twist of irony, the episode that had initially seemed like a liability for O'Keeffe's reputation ultimately fortified the legal infrastructure protecting artists nationwide. Critics who had once dismissed O'Keeffe's desert paintings as mere novelty now reevaluated her oeuvre through the prism of her 10-day absence. Art journals published thoughtful retrospectives exploring themes of disappearance, silence, and concealment in modernist work. Symposiums in Chicago and Philadelphia dissected the O'Keeffe effect, examining how her retreat blurred the line between life and art. Scholars debated whether her withdrawal was an act of self-preservation or a performance piece. An unscripted but undeniably theatrical statement on the vulnerability of creative genius under the glare of fame. Yet for Georgia herself, the episode remained deeply personal. She confided to a close friend that she felt both betrayed and liberated by the complicity of those around her. Their silence had been a double-edged sword. It had protected her in the moment, but underscored her isolation. In her journals, she wrote of the weight of absence, how the void left by herself imposed exile resonated in every landscape she painted thereafter. That tension between presence and absence infused her later work, lending it a haunting quality that critics would not fully appreciate until decades later. As the first anniversary of her disappearance approached in July 1947, MoMA hosted a commemorative exhibition titled Return to Silence. It featured her new desert series alongside a handful of earlier flower paintings. The press release made no mention of her 10-day retreat, referring only to an interlude of creative recalibration. Still, visitors sensed the undercurrent of history. Each room felt like a chiaroscuro of revelation and concealment. In the closing gallery, a single spotlight illuminated a small canvas, a solitary white flower against pitch-black ground. Titled simply, Absent. Critics hailed it as her most profound work yet, a masterstroke that distilled a lifetime of experience into a single image. By reclaiming her narrative, Georgia O'Keeffe turned a potential scandal into a paradigm shift, forever altering the dynamics of artistic agency. Her vanishing act was not an escape, but a declaration that the artists must hold supremacy over the market's demands. Through the silence she orchestrated, she painted her most enduring masterpiece, the blueprint for creative sovereignty in the modern age.